Welcome to everyone joining us from across the United States and around the world. The Wright Center, in partnership with the UCI and National Writing Project, is so honored to host today's discussion with Cornelius Minor, who will be our keynote speaker at our December 15th virtual literacy conference. His talk at the conference is called The Way Forward: Engagement, Equity, and Access Beyond the Pandemic. Cornelius is a Brooklyn-based educator who works with teachers, school leaders, and community leaders to support equitable literacy reform in cities and sometimes villages across the globe. His latest book, We Got This, explores how the work of creating more equitable school spaces is embedded in our everyday choices, specifically in the choice to really listen to kids. Most recently, he and his partner and his wife, Cass Minor, have established the Minor Collective. It's a community-based movement designed to foster sustainable change in schools. Whether he's working with educators and kids in Los Angeles, Seattle, or New York City, Cornelius uses his love for technology, hip hop, and social media to bring communities together. As a teacher, Cornelius draws not only on his years of teaching middle school in the Bronx and Brooklyn, but also on time spent skateboarding, shooting hoops, and working with young people. And now I have the privilege of also introducing Virginia Nguyen, today's interviewer. Virginia is a passionate high school history teacher with over 15 years of experience. She's also a National Writing Project Fellow and a diversity, equity, inclusion educational consultant. She's the daughter of Vietnamese refugees, which has shaped her passion for AAPI advocacy, commitment to social justice, equity, and leadership. She's the co-founder of Educate to Empower, whose mission is to empower educators and change the world. So thank you both so much for agreeing to engage in this, what I know is going to be a very rich discussion. And I'd like to just turn it over to Virginia.
Thanks so much, Carol. Okay, so hi, Cornelius.
Hi, Virginia.
I'm gonna start off and just straight up embarrass myself because that's just what I do, and admit that I'm such a huge fan of yours and your work. And I have your book right here with me, and I have been reading it, and I started reading it during the school year last year, and trying to implement stuff right away. And I have to say, as I was reading your book, I was nodding almost at every part and saying yes out loud to myself and anyone else who could hear, mostly my kids. And it got to the point where I was like, just give up on highlighting, because highlighting a whole book is ridiculous, right?
Wow. Well, that means so much
basically,
to me, Virginia. Just
yeah.
thank you. I think back to my days in high school, and and there were two people that I absolutely adored: the school librarian and my history teacher. And so, just as I listened to you talk, you're bringing all of those memories back to me. Just I think what you do is not just vital, but really life-saving and life-affirming. So it's just such an honor to be here with you. Yeah.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and get started.
Yes.
In the era of COVID-19, what norms and rituals might we as teachers need to establish in our classrooms to serve the social emotional needs of our students?
Wow, and there's not a second that passes by where I don't think about that, and I think I have to answer that question both as a father and as an educator, and really also as a New Yorker, that I live in Brooklyn, in the middle of Brooklyn, but then also all around me was the power of community and creativity and people coming together to solve unconventional problems in unconventional ways. And so I experienced throughout this pandemic, the best and the worst that humanity has to offer. And so when I think about our way forward must be tapping into that collective energy. And so there are three things that come to mind for me, really, when I think about taking care of students moving forward. I think the first is acknowledging what they've gone through as a result of this pandemic. But also in that acknowledgement, it also means acknowledging the things that we didn't have the capacity to see before. That this pandemic gave us the firsthand view into people's homes, into their living rooms, their bedrooms, their kitchens. And what we saw alarmed many educators. But these are the things that we've been talking about, Virginia, and I know your work in equity. These are things that we've been talking about for years, that kids not having adequate food, kids not having access to technology or to books, these aren't new problems, but these challenges were illuminated because of this pandemic. And so acknowledging what kids have been through and also acknowledging the incredible work that they do, that every day we saw young people taking care of younger siblings. We saw young people coming together to figure out how to get schoolwork done or how to sustain a friend. And so that acknowledgement is really important. But then there's also reflection, that after one acknowledges something, you've got to reflect on it. And for me, reflection is an active verb. It's not just sitting in my chair thinking about all of the things that I now know, but reflection in this instance means that we think actively about what we need to change moving forward, right? And so when we think about change, change isn't prescriptive. I can't say, well, Virginia, these are the things that you need to change in your community, because I don't know your community. But reflection really has to be, let me acknowledge what all the kids have gone through, and let me consider what they might need and think about how I embed those things in teaching and learning every day. And so me, I'm a language arts teacher, right? And so I think all the time about books, right? I think all the time about essays, right? But essays don't exist in the abstract, nor do books. That books and plots exist so that we can pattern ourselves after what we learn from characters, right? And so as I think about how we move forward, one of the ways that I'm taking care of kids is I am making sure that we have books that demonstrate characters who are exercising the kind of care that kids have had to exercise, employing the kinds of judgment that kids have had to employ, considering the human needs that kids have had to, so that kids get to see that not only are there people like me, but there's a blueprint for this moving forward, right? And so something as simple as book choice, right, is how we take care of kids after that reflection. And then the third thing for me, and I know this sounds silly, but it's being vigilant, right? That this moment scares me in some ways, because we all have had this collective empathy, right? And in moments of collective empathy, everybody's always interested in being student-centered. But the question that I keep asking is, what happens 2 months from now? What happens 5 months from now? That I don't want us to walk away from this collective empathy. I want this collective empathy to become us and to become how we move forward. And so for me, those are 3 things that I'm really thinking about in terms of like the way forward for kids.
I agree with you. Like, I want to see us continue to be vigilant. And this really reinforces the theme in your book, which is like, listen to students, invite them, right? Invite them to share, and then build your teaching around their needs.
Yeah.
And that's how we do it. So thank you so much. Now, we're both teachers and we're both parents, and I actually have a 7 and 9-year-old myself. So like, what, right? And so what's your self-care routine? What are your teaching colleagues' self-care routines? Like, how do we as educators handle the pressure of teaching?
Wow, and to be honest, Virginia, like this is a conversation that we could be in for hours. There's so much that I'm learning, right? That so much of what we consider to be achievement in the West is really toxic, right? It's this culture of I want to get as much done without paying attention to my human needs. And then we give people awards for that. We call that excellence, right? So people make these incredible sacrifices that are detrimental to their families or detrimental to their own health. And again, we call that excellence, and we reward it and we incentivize it. And so I've really been thinking a lot about 2 things in terms of my own self-care, being really clear about my priorities and what those priorities are. And so being able to name in order what my actual priorities are. And so being able to say in staff meetings or to people that I work with that my number 1 priority is the well-being of students and my colleagues. My second priority is academic growth. My third priority is institutional stability. So being able to have very clear priorities and then making decisions that align to those priorities is really, really important. And so when I make a decision, when I decline something or say no to an opportunity, I can say quite clearly that my top 3 priorities, again, are stability for students, like well-being and academic growth. And this thing that I'm being asked to do does not speak directly to one of my priorities. And so I'm going to decline that thing right now. And so that's been really important for me, just having very clear public priorities as I take care of myself. But then also recognizing that I think self-care is a bit of a misnomer. And I love that you named it earlier, Virginia, that really this is community care. right? And so much of how I love myself and how I care for myself is by spending time with people like you. Colleagues who can give me critical feedback when I need it, colleagues who can encourage me when I need it, colleagues who can correct me and inspire me when I need it. And recognizing, I think, again, so much of Western culture is the story of the lone teacher, right? The story of the singular person who persevered. And we know that there is never a narrative that is really about a singular person, that everyone has community. But when we tell stories without community, we begin to create these toxic fictions. And so really the second aspect of my self-care is having people that I can call and cry with, or having people that I can call and complain to, or having people that I can call, or when I start to complain, they can say to me, Cornelius, you're better than this, right? And so all of those things I think have really contributed to my health. And then also I make a lot of mistakes. And so I've had to learn how to apologize, and I've had to learn that apologies aren't just words, right? That apologies are commitment to sustain actions over time,
Mm.
right? And so when I make a misstep, when I make a huge mistake, I don't just say, I'm sorry, Virginia, because those are words, but then I live in a way that communicates to you every day that I am getting better. And that's been a critical part of my self-care. Yeah.
Thank you. So what I'm hearing is the importance of like knowing what is important to you, and then keep that what your focus is, right? So like you said, the well-being of students. I think that's something that will resonate with all educators as your primary goal, and how you define well-being for students, right? And then this idea of like academic growth, well-being for students and academic growth can go hand in hand, but sometimes you have to sacrifice the moment of like going over math facts to check in. So I get
Absolutely.
that, like that's awesome. And then I agree with you 100%. It's about community. It's about community. That's what we want to foster with our students, so they don't feel alone, but we should model it ourselves and trust our own community. Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So as you think about those pillars, or those like goals that you have, what elements of remote instruction do you think and hope educators will continue to embrace during our face-to-face instruction? And what parts of remote instruction do you think no longer serve our students once we're back in the classroom?
Oh, the part that I'm going to keep for sure is the flexibility. That learning to be flexible was my major lesson of the last year. I think there are so many times where we talk about equity work in these abstract terms, right? So people talk about, racism or sexism, or people talk about ableism, or people talk about discrimination against like immigrants or multilingual people, right? And we talk about them in these abstract terms. And one of the things that I have like come to understand firsthand is that there's this belief, right, when we talk about injustice, that people connect injustice to being unkind. And those are not the same thing, right? When we talk about racism or sexism, people are like, oh, kindness, right? That'll cure all the things, right? And kindness is important. But when we're talking about justice, it is not simply about kindness. That we could go around and put all of the mean people on an island far away, and injustice would still exist, because injustice is about systems, right? When we think about how people don't get what they need, it's not because there's some mean, evil, nefarious person in the back of a classroom plotting against students, but it's actually because we continue to invest in systems that do not benefit kids. And one of the things that I learned during this pandemic, and when I talk systemically, systems aren't just at the district level, right? Not just at the state or national level. Systems are the everyday routines that I enact in my classroom. So who gets to speak, when, and how? What does success look like? How do kids get access to resources that they need? All of those are systems that I, as a classroom teacher, have the power to construct, right? And all of those are systems that can either include kids or exclude kids. And so that idea of flexibility, I had to learn to be flexible during this pandemic. One major lesson for me, I'm in 7th and 8th grade, and one thing that I discovered during this pandemic was a lot of 7th and 8th graders would log in late or not log in at all. And at first I, did the typical 7th grade teacher thing where I'm like, oh, these kids are so irresponsible. But then the more questions I asked, the more I listened to kids, I realized that kids were logging in late because many times the 7th and 8th graders were responsible for 2 or 3 other siblings. And so a lot of my 7th graders would ensure that their 1st grade brother logged in, and then their sister in 3rd grade logged in before they could get to their remote work, or if there were even a 3rd computer, right? And so the more I listened to kids, the more I realized that what I was experiencing was not like absence because kids were mean spirited or absent because they were irresponsible, but it was absence because they had other responsibilities. And I remember asking kids, I remember the day was like a Tuesday morning, and I had 32 that I was supposed to be working with, and 7 showed up. And I asked the 7, hey, where's all our friends? And they were like, oh, well, this one's working with their cousin, and this one's supporting their grandmother, and this one. And so I remember asking to that group of 7 kids, like, what would be the best way to get language arts done, given that we all have so many responsibilities? And the kids told me 2 things. They were like, recording your lessons would be helpful. That way we could watch it on our cell phone. But then they said, you know what, Mr. Minor, what would actually be really helpful is if there were somebody to meet us at 7 p.m. because that's when all of our younger siblings go to bed, and then I can actually focus. So one of the young people told me, like, I can't actually focus as long as my younger siblings are up. And so there was one day where I agreed to meet a few of them at 7 p.m., right? And so I had a classroom of 32, only 7 were showing up regularly. There was one day that I agreed to meet some of them at 7 p.m. I was like, I only got 20 minutes. I got to get my own kids to bed, but I'll give you a 20-minute recap of the week. I log on. There were 83 kids who logged on at 7 p.m. to meet me. And so what that taught me is that they care so much, but the complexities of their lives in that moment did not allow them to express that care within the systems that I had constructed. So I constructed new systems. And so once I realized that 83 kids, like kids literally brought their friends. They were like, our teacher is meeting us in the evening. And so even though I was only responsible for 32, people brought friends, and that was so powerful to me. And so then what that taught me is I called the principal right away and I was like, look, here's the data that I have collected. Typical attendance every day between 7 and 12 students in a classroom of 32. I meet them one evening at 7 p.m. for 20 minutes, 83 kids show up. That's compelling data. And so what I lobbied for was, I was like, is there a way where I could log in to work late one day a week, and then I repay that 20 minutes at the end of the day in the evening? And so just offering a 20-minute tutorial at 7 in the evening gave so many more kids access, right? And so that idea of flexibility, because here's what I'm afraid of, here's what terrifies me, that educators are sometimes quick to dismiss kids as irresponsible or not being invested, when really it's the systems that we have designed that won't allow them to thrive. And so I hope moving forward that we hold on to that flexibility, and that we channel that flexibility into instructional redesign that can benefit kids in powerful ways.
Wow, thank you. I love so much. I love everything about your answer, about how you started with, like catching yourself having a negative thought. And then you went into how to ask the students what they need. And then you did it. And then you were able to then, like once you had proof of it, you went to your admin and you talked to them about what you saw and how to help kids. And I'm sure other teachers who saw that I would, I'm like, why didn't I think of that? And, I love it so much. So thank you for that. And I want to speak a lot more actually about the injustice that you talk about. Like injustice is, systems. How do white teachers who have committed to anti-racist pedagogies approach this 21-22 school year differently than previous years?
And I've been thinking about that a lot. I think it's no secret the trend that's happening around our country, right? With this intentional legislative backlash to advancements in conversations about justice, right? That the last year has brought about a bit of a reawakening for folks who didn't know, like that people like you and I have known for a long time about injustice as it exists. But the murders of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd really shined a light that a lot of people hadn't seen before. And so many conversations were beginning to happen, so much work was starting to happen. And so the legislative backlash that we see right now in terms of anti-CRT GDP or any other state measures, I think are a real response to that. And so when I think about the role of white educators, I have to be very careful because I'm not white and I've never been white. And so so I, and so though I have white friends, I want to really speak kind of, as a BIPOC person who spends a lot of time with young people, who spends a lot of time in the community. And so when I think about the role of white educators, it really goes back to what we've been talking about, like listening and centering what children are actually saying, right? Specifically BIPOC children, specifically children with learning disabilities, specifically children who are multilingual, specifically queer kids, right? That we listen to and center the things that kids say. And there's this nice thing that that folks do sometimes where we listen to kids and we make it all about the feelings and our emotional voyeurism, but then we don't act on it. Right. And so it's not just about listening to kids so that we can feel good about our altruism. It's not just listening to kids so that we can feel like we can post the right kinds of things on Twitter. It's about listening to kids and then asking oneself, how do I make the necessary institutional changes to honor what I now know? That's really kind of like the thing that comes to mind for me. Another thing that I think a lot about too is the incredible emotional and intellectual labor done by BIPOC educators, specifically women. And again, I've never been a woman, but I work alongside several women who do incredible emotional labor. Against, racism, incredibly emotional labor against sexism, against ableism, against homophobia. And so really understanding that emotional and intellectual labor is exactly that. It's labor, right? And so having white colleagues step in and say, hey, I see the emotional weight that you're carrying. Here are some ways that I can help, right? Or I see the emotional weight that you're carrying. Here are some things that I am prepared to do so that you carry less weight. That often when we think about how progress gets made in our school, it's often on the backs of women. And that's something that I am learning to get better at as well. And so when I think about what it means to stand in solidarity with folks, it's not just announcing my solidarity. It's not just naming the things that I believe in, but it's actually engaging in the work. And here's one of the things that I think about all the time, that there is this binary thinking that exists in justice-oriented work that sometimes obscures the progress that we can make, where people have this idea of good and bad. So there are good people who are on the side of justice, and there are bad people that are not. It's not that simple. That binary thinking has never served anyone, right? That often the people who obstruct justice are our cousins, are our friends, are our neighbors, are people that we are in community with. There's one example that comes to mind. I was working, I work in a special education setting. And so in New York City, we have inclusive classrooms. And so there's typically one general educator and one special educator in a classroom. And we work together to serve all of the students in our classroom. And so I'm really proud that in our classroom, we have students who are hearing impaired. We have students who have various learning disabilities. And I take a lot of pride in fostering that community. Kids learn so much from each other, just being in close proximity and learning together and learning to love one another. And so that's something I take great pride in. About 3 years ago, a friend that I attend church with, and I'm in several social groups with, came to me and she said, my son is finally in your class. And this is the happiest day of his life. Again, I've known his mother socially for a long time, and he and I have been friendly, but he wasn't a seventh grader. And so now that he was becoming a seventh grader, he was going to get to be in my class. And she was like, he is so excited. He's known you from soccer. He's known you from skateboarding. He's known you from around the neighborhood. He's known you from church. And so now he's finally going to be in your class. But then she says this, she's like, but I have my reservations. I don't know if I want my kid in the class with those other kids. Now, this is somebody that I know. This is somebody that I'm friendly with in the neighborhood. And she says, is there anything that you can do to make sure that my kid isn't around those kids? And that presented a challenge for me because, again, this is a person who has eaten dinner in my home. This is a person that I've played soccer with her family. And here she is advocating against the very lives and existence of children that I have built my community to care about, right? And in that moment, that binary shatters, right? That we're not talking about good people and bad people here. we're talking about the everyday people that we go to dinner with, that we
Mhm.
hang out with, who are advocating for injustice in order to benefit their own families, right? And so when we think about how injustice shows up in school, it's not those people from that town far away who wear hoods. It's not those people that we see on Fox News. It's your best friend. It's the person you go to church with. It's the person you go to Starbucks with, right? And so I've really been, one of the things I've been saying to white colleagues, to all our colleagues, is that that's the kind of courage I need you to summon. I don't need you to summon the courage to go to a march or to post something online. Anybody can do that. I need you to summon the courage to speak to your best friend when they bring up something unjust, when they want to recruit you to things that don't speak for all students or don't represent all students. And so when I think about the work moving forward, it's nuanced, right? It's not a list of things that we can give, but rather it's that people, again, are vigilant and attentive, and then that they take action when the opportunity arises.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It reminds me of, I mean, it's in your book, it's what you're saying right now, which is like listen and then, act on your values. So if your friend or your neighbor or someone in your community says something that is harmful,
Yeah.
use your courage to speak up at that moment and write
Yeah.
that. And also trust that your community wants to do better.
Yeah.
Just like we
Yeah.
trust our students, right? I trust my educator community that we want to do better. So the calling in and calling out is embarrassing at points, but we got to do it, right? That's how we move
Absolutely.
forward. And thank you so much for acknowledging the emotional labor that women and women of color shoulder. Let me ask you, as a fellow educator of color, like, what's the way forward for us? What's the way forward for other teachers of color in our
Yeah.
community?
I know this is going to sound like a very, very generic answer, but I actively mean this. The way forward is love and community. That I am learning how to show up for other people more profoundly every day, right? And so love can be a really easy thing to say or to put on a T-shirt or to put on a bulletin board. I don't mean that kind of love, not Pinterest love, but like actual love. Like, Virginia, I see that you've had a hard week of lesson planning. I've got 4 vocabulary lessons. Do you want them? Like, that's love, right? Or Virginia, I see that, like, it's been a difficult day at school. Like, give me your kids. I'll take them to the gym for 15 minutes while you catch your breath. Like that kind of love. And one of the things that I am learning too is that things have been so intense that sometimes coming to you and saying, Virginia, what do you need, is still a tall ask. And so really just saying, hey, Virginia, here are 4 ways that I can support you today. I see that you're sweating a lot because the kids are being weird. So I can take them to the gym. I can make sure to have a read aloud prepared for after lunch so you can take an extra lunch, or I can plan an extra lesson for you. What would be most helpful? So that I don't have to come to you and ask you to do additional emotional labor to inform me how I can best support you, but rather I, again, am standing in solidarity with you by saying, here are 3 options that I have. Would any of these help? And then also accepting a no, that like, sometimes people just need to see that you're in their corner. And so sometimes you might say, well, Cornelius, the 3 things that you've prepared are amazing, but I don't need any help right now. Thank you for asking. And that too is being, in solidarity, in community, and in love with each other. And so I'm learning again how to take more exquisite and intentional care of our colleagues.
That's great. You just listed things I didn't even know I needed, and now I need them. But thank you. That's great. And now I know how to. I'll use that to guide how I show up for my colleagues as well. So thank you.
And again, this is work we're still growing. I'm still learning how to do this, right? Like, that I get called in all the time where people are like, well, Cornelius, here's a different way that you could have showed up that would have been helpful, and those have been some of the most valuable lessons this year for people who take the time to call me and say, hey, Cornelius, this was an opportunity that you could have shown up and you didn't. And that hurt, and so moving forward, here are some things that I need from you. And so I think that that's been, again, when I think about how I have grown this year and how I need to continue to grow, those have been some of my biggest lessons. Yeah.
Thank you. So we're down to our last question, and the question is about our literacy conference this year, and it's the way forward: engagement, equity, and access beyond the pandemic. So what are some equitable reading and writing practices that you wish literacy teachers knew about?
This is so exciting for me. Again, I spend my life thinking about reading and writing. I think the first is to interrogate those very terms, reading and writing. That there is this elitist, classist belief in school that reading only counts if you read what the teacher likes. And so one of the things that's been really important for me, especially in this pandemic, is that kids read whatever they can get their hands on. Kids read whatever excites them, whatever gives them joy, whatever gives them happiness. That we can do incredibly skilled reading work in any number of contexts. I also want people to understand that we live in the 21st century. So reading isn't just a text. That reading is the kind of intellectual labor that I do when I consume a YouTube video.
Mhm.
Reading is the kind of interrogation that I do when I'm deciding which pair of Jordans to get, right? Like reading is the kind of analysis that I do when I'm reading video game reviews because I only have $60 and I can only buy one video game, right? Reading is the kind of ranking and ordering that I do when I'm evaluating Pokemon cards, and so I want educators to see that we have this very narrow view of reading that we can really expand moving forward. That when a kid has to compare the values of two different Pokemon attacks, that is like serious intellectual labor, right? And I can teach you how to transfer, right? Borrowing the words of Grant Wiggins, how to transfer the skill that you like Marshall when you're reading Pokemon cards and really applying that to when you're reading in academic text. And so those things are really, really important for me. The second, too, is that I think all the time about writing. And again, there is this like classist, elitist view of what writing is and how writing exists, right? That writing isn't just composition so that you hand it into a teacher, but in this era defined by a pandemic, writing is how you put words together to secure resources for your family. Writing is how you explain to your employer or how you explain to your teacher your needs so that they can better serve you, right? Writing is how you weaponize words to keep your family safe when it's threatened, right? Writing is what you do when we're composing ways to access community resources or ways to extend those resources to our friends. And so I did a lot of functional writing with kids this year, really helping kids. Like one young man I was after him for books or something, and he was like, well, I wish I had the book, but I can't find it in the library and they don't have it. And I was like, well, let me show you how to write an email to the librarian so you can get it on interlibrary loan. And he was like, wait, I can get any book in the world if I write an email to the librarian, and so that's writing, right? We talk about persuasion in this weird abstract,
Mhm.
but then to apply persuasion to something that I actually need elevates the skill, right? And so that's really exciting for me, and I hope that that's something that people take to heart, because one of the things that I think all the time about is, again, that notion of transference, that if what I'm learning in school does not connect to my life, then it's all lost, right? I think so many times we assume that kids can make that connection, and I'm really intentional about making that connection. So when I teach kids to construct arguments, I say, yes, this is good for this essay that we're writing, but also if you construct arguments in this way consistently and you use this on your family, your parents are more likely to let you stay out late. Your
Mhm.
friends will more likely choose the activities that you want to engage in. People in the community will see you as a leader more often, and you'll be asked to take greater risk and responsibilities, right? So helping kids to see that if you want to be seen in this way in your community, these are the kinds of rhetorical moves that you can make. Those kinds of lessons hit different, right? Those kinds of lessons resonate in different ways. And so that's really exciting for me. Yeah.
Thank you. I loved all of it. I mean, you're really talking about like teaching to what kids really need now, right? Like
Yeah.
we're, like you said, interrogating, we're disrupting, we are analyzing, and ultimately we are listening. We're listening to what teachers need, and that's what we're giving, right? So thank you so much for today's conversation. Um, you're amazing, and you have
Well,
inspired me in so many ways, or I should say, you have continued to inspire me in so many ways. So I look forward to hearing you speak in December. And I'm going to now invite Carol to join us with her closing remarks.
thank you. And while Carol comes on, Virginia, I just want to say thank you. Like, I mean, the work that you do and the love that you have for kids and for community is beyond evident. Like, I am so, so envious of those who get to call you teacher. So thank you.
So Virginia was a member of the UCI Writing Project, and I've known her since she was an undergraduate at UCI. So I'm very proud of her and all of the work that she's doing. And I thought your discussion was really amazing. It was so rich and inspirational. I know that people watching it will get so much out of it. So if those of you watching enjoyed listening to this really fantastic dialogue between Cornelius and Virginia today, we hope you will come join us for our literacy conference in December. It's an all-day virtual conference on December 15th. Cornelius is our morning keynote, followed by Troy Hicks in the afternoon. Virginia is one of our workshop presenters, and so we're so excited to showcase her work. And she'll be joined by other presenters like Micah Bournet, Jennifer Fletcher, Maisha Nguyen, Mary Howard, Richard Cook, and many, many more. So we look forward to having you join our learning community, and we hope everyone watching will join us then. So goodbye for now, and thank you so much, both of you.